You will laugh with a tear in your eye. You will cry with a smile in your heart.
The doctor had cautioned him. He was urged to cease by his wife. But Ross Martin paid the ultimate price on July 3, 1981, for ignoring both of them. Hollywood remained mum for 4 decades on the true cause of death for television's most legendary master of disguise. Newly released medical documents shed light on the tragic events leading up to the Wild Wild West star's death while playing tennis. Not even Robert Conrad, his best friend, could save him. Not only that, but the studio that made a killing off of him skipped his burial altogether. In Grodek, Poland, on March 22, 1920, Martin Rosenblatt became Ross Martin. He was born into a Jewish family in Poland, and his father, Isaac Rosenblatt, was a tinsmith. They lived in an uncertain time following World War I. Sarah Lerner, his mother, was in charge of housework. They were subject to rising anti-Semitism and instability, like many other Jewish families in Eastern Europe. They took the tough choice to leave everything behind and start over in America because they desired a safer existence. Grodek was a province of Poland when Martin was born. Unfortunately, it ended up in Ukraine as a result of redrawn boundaries following World War II. The area was dynamic and ever-evolving, adding unpredictability to life. His very name would evolve as time went on. Over time, Martin Rosenblatt became into Ross Martin, an American moniker that suited his recent relocation. He set off on his transoceanic voyage at the tender age of 1. Danzig was the port of embarkation for his family's steamer New Rochelle on August 29, 1920. They reached Ellis Island on September 18, after nearly 3 weeks at sea. A little modification that frequently occurred during paperwork was that his name was registered as Marcus Rosenblatt by immigration officials. The site of Ellis Island was the initial destination for several immigrants seeking a new beginning. Like the majority of passengers, the Rosenblatt family rode on the lower deck. They were subject to rigorous legal and medical screenings before entering the United States. They moved to the Bronx, an area teeming with immigrants attempting to start over, when they were cleared. Ross Martin became multilingual before he even learned English as he grew up in this world. Around the house, he used Polish, Yiddish, and Russian. He learned French and Spanish later on. Italian language. In his later years as an actor, his linguistic prowess proved to be one of his best assets. He also slipped in a few Russian lines when playing Artemus Gordon in Wild Wild West, bringing an intimate dimension to his shows. Martin was an academic prodigy despite coming from a working-class immigrant household and facing many obstacles in his upbringing. The elite City College of New York, where he studied, is well known for its large number of first-generation students. With a magna cum laude degree, he established himself as a top student in his class. He then went on to get his Juris Doctor from the National University School of Law at George Washington University. A secure job in law or business appeared to be in his future. However, he had other plans. He decided to pursue acting instead of law. Ross and West was a comedic combo he formed in the 1940s with Bernie West. Upstate New York was no match for their fast-paced, physically comic performances in vaudeville and nightclubs. They had impeccable timing and were well loved by the crowds. Later in life, West referred to Martin as a comedy genius, praising his innate talent for entertaining audiences. The pair, however, was short-lived. During this time, West shifted his focus to writing and producing, and Martin sought to pursue other entertainment prospects. West would eventually appear in sitcoms like In the Family, but Martin had already achieved more success by then. He had made it on Broadway by 1953. His breakout performance was in the musical parody Hazel Flag, which was adapted from the 1937 film Nothing Sacred. At the Mark Hellinger Theater, he was Dr. Egelhofer for 190 performances. Jules Stein composed the music and Bob Hilliard wrote the words for the hit show. Martin demonstrated that he was more than simply a comic when he shared the stage alongside actors such as Thomas Mitchell and Helen Gallagher, thanks to his magnetic stage presence and talent for blending comedy with drama. He quickly became well known in the radio industry after Broadway opened new opportunities for him. Martin rose to fame in the 1940s and 1950s as a voice actor on radio shows such as Dimension X and The Cavalcade of America, where he displayed remarkable versatility in his portrayal of many characters and accents. The Ross Martin Show was his own program that sprang from it. In every episode, his multi-role acting chops were on full display. At times, the audience didn't even notice he was the same guy speaking different voices. Because of his adaptability, he became a popular voice actor and eventually found success in live TV anthologies. Afterwards, Hollywood made an approach. He first appeared on screen in 1955's Conquest of Space, a science fiction epic directed by George Powell and detailing the first human expedition to Mars. In a plot that featured innovative visual effects and profound philosophical issues, he portrayed Sergeant Andrei Fodor, a supporting role. Although the picture failed to gross well, it was a significant milestone for Martin. In 1958, he made an appearance in The Colossus of New York, another science fiction thriller, just a few years after that. This was the first step on a path that would take him nearly 30 years as his Hollywood career took off. Playing the role of Ann Amo in Blake Edwards' 1959 CBS sitcom Mr. Lucky was Ross Martin's big break. Ann Amo was the nimble-witted sidekick of the talkative gambler who worked for John Vivian. The show's adventurous and perilous tone came from its setting aboard a floating casino. The instant Ann Amo saw Martin's caustic wit, he stood out. The authorities discover a concealed stash of weapons on Lucky's boat in the pilot episode, which puts a damper on his smuggling enterprise. "We are in danger with his deadpan delivery. Smuggling guns is my responsibility," articulated the essence of his character's astute humor. Added his own flair to the part off-screen. He came up with his own disguises and fabricated statements. He spied a mobster in one episode while disguised as a bartender. A talent that would play a significant role in his profession down the road was also creating his own cosmetics. The show's flair and comedy were lauded, but ratings were low, and it was cancelled after only one season. Nonetheless, naysayers paid attention. Martin's performance was hailed by TV Guide as utterly endearing, as well as his talent for assuming several personas and accents. Most significantly, Mr. Lucky put him in touch with Blake Edwards, a filmmaker who would have a pivotal impact on his career trajectory. Experiment in Terror, 1962, which Martin performed 3 years later, stunned viewers. He terrorizes Lee Remick's bank teller Kelly Sherwood as the psychopath Garland Red Lynch, who suffers from asthma. Coming from the charismatic Ndomo, it was a radical change. Martin practiced Lynch's unsettling laborious breathing by observing a childhood buddy who suffered from asthma. A vicious garage assault sequence, shot in one take, was one of his many self-insisted stunts. The outcome was horrifying. Lynch has Sherwood listen on the phone as he strangles her co-worker, a terrifying scene. As time passes, his breathing becomes increasingly labored. Reviewers saw parallels to Anthony Perkins's portrayal of Norman Bates in the film Psycho. Lynch was praised by the New York Times for his mastery of subtle menace. David Lynch, the director and no related to Martin, said in a subsequent interview that the character served as inspiration for Twin Peaks killer Bob. Martin, in an unusual feat for thriller villains, received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor for his performance. One of his career-defining performances, he nearly turned down out of fear of being typecast. Martin demonstrated in 1965's The Great Race that he was capable of creating villains that were both hilarious and menacing. He engaged in the art of playing. In the made-up realm of Carpania, there is a plotting aristocrat named Baron Rolf von Stupp. Although Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon were also in the Blake Edwards directed picture, Martin was the star of every scene he was in. His character's battle with Leslie, played by Curtis, is one of the film's most memorable moments. The Baron prefers a man's weapon and smirks as he teases. "Have you practiced using a saber?" Martin had the ideal comedy tie before beginning an exquisite but absurd sword battle. Additionally, he innovated while using more than 4,000 pies in the now famous 10-minute pie fight. "It was gloriously humiliating," he laughed later. His critics adored him. His performance was described as delightfully suave by Variety, and remarked on how he effortlessly stole every scene. With a record-breaking $12 million budget, the largest ever for a comedy, the picture established Martin as a serious contender among Hollywood's A-listers. From 1959 until 1965, Martin demonstrated his versatility as the charming prankster Ann Amo. When playing Garland Lynch, he was the stuff of nightmares. He excelled at comedy villainy in his role as Baron von Stupa. Rare was his ability to switch gears between terror and humor. His analytical approach to acting was influenced by his bilingual upbringing and legal studies, he said. Apart from performing, his talents were extensive. Even before that, in his early days with Mr. Lucky, he had been developing characters. Ross has the ability to make you laugh and then frighten all in the same scene, according to Blake Edwards. It was his enchantment. One of Hollywood's most distinctive talents, he has the ability to transform into whomever he wanted. The role of the television sidekick was revolutionized by Ross Martin. He was more than James West's sidekick on The Wild Wild West, 1965 to 1969, in his role as Artemus Gordon. One of the greatest disguise artists TV has ever witnessed, he was also a master of espionage and a technical genius. Even Robert Conrad, who co-starred with him, frequently failed to identify him until the cameras started rolling because of how convincingly he transformed. Created around 90% of his own masks. He used wigs, prosthetics, and elaborate costumes to create his appearance in his dressing room. The team had no idea what was ahead of them. His 1967 film Night of the Vicious Valentine featured him as a stooped-over gravedigger with a latex hump and decaying teeth. Because of his dissimilar appearance, he was mistaken for a supporting actor by certain members of the crew. Facial makeup wasn't the extent of his mastery of concealment. For each part, he went to great lengths to alter his speech, body language, and habits. Pomeranian, Yiddish, Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and English fluently. He was a master at accent switching. With the addition of a waxed mustache and an exaggerated Parisian lilt, he transformed into a flashy French magician in 1960's Night of the Raven. In retrospect, Ken Chase, the show's makeup artist, acknowledged that Martin has greater transformational skills than the majority of Hollywood effects teams. During lunch, Martin would doodle ideas for disguises on napkins, which he would later put into action. He felt the physical strain of the position as well. He had to apply full-body burn makeup for 12 hours for his 1968 role as a maimed arsonist in Night of the Returning Dead. Even though the latex was extremely irritating to his skin, he insisted on continuing filming. His unwavering commitment brought to mind the legendary silent cinema actor Lon Chaney Sr., often known as the Man of a Thousand Faces. Night of the Casual Killer, 1967 showcased one of his most astonishing abilities. He performed Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major on violin during a suspenseful undercover scenario. This was no sham. Was a concert-trained violinist who had attended Juilliard in the 1940s. Martin played live on site throughout filming of the scene. The workers applauded him enthusiastically. Everybody was crying, even the grips. There was more to his musical history than meets the eye. It joined Artemus Gordon's espionage craft. During a jailbreak in 1966, he concealed a Morse code transmitter inside a harp and transmitted signals to James West. In his spare time, Martin Gordon would unwind by playing the violin. When he needed a break from his terrifying stunt sequences, he would listen to Bach. Classical training nearly lost him the part, ironically. Producers felt he was very dramatic for a Western role during his tryouts. To show them that they were mistaken, he made up a story in which Gordon played the violin to divert the attention of a group of criminals at a saloon. Thus, he was cast in the role. Then tragedy befell in 1968. Martin had a near-fatal heart attack on August 17 and fell while filming Night of the Sabatini Death. His left coronary artery was determined to be 95% blocked by the doctors. His co-star was abruptly removed from the show while he was airlifted to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. He continued to perform admirably regardless of the circumstances. For a program that was sometimes written off as ampy, he received an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Lead Actor in 1969. His breakthrough came at the same time when The Wild Wild West was suddenly scrapped. Regardless of the show's popularity, CBS canceled it on March 12, 1969. Political pressure compelled the network to cancel the show, despite its 12th-place Nielsen rating. Congress began to impose restrictions on violent TV content after the killings of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Despite CBS continuing to play Mannix, a similarly violent detective program, The Wild Wild West became an easy target. Before it all fell apart, Ross Martin was at the pinnacle of his profession. After a heart attack that almost killed him in 1968, he returned to The Wild Wild West for its 4th season. Even though he got well and came back to finish the series, his reputation had taken a hit in Hollywood. Major networks withdrew their support when industry insurers deemed him a high risk. Following the 1969 cancellation of the program by CBS because to growing concerns over TV violence, Martin had difficulty securing prominent parts. He may have reignited his career in 1970 when he was handed the main role in the detective series Banyan. But the producers reconsidered after looking at his health data. Instead, they cast Robert Forster, a younger actor who was deemed healthy enough to be cast. Studio officials were forthright about their choice, as Martin's agent Harry Gold stated in a 1975 interview with TV Guide. According to what they informed him, in 1971, Martin portrayed the role of art critic Dale Kingston in the frame-worthy film Columbo. A $250,000 insurance bond was requested by producers in the event that his health caused any delays in production. Since the studio declined to pay, Martin ended up footing the bill himself. Despite receiving an Emmy nomination, his salary had decreased for the part. To a large extent. The Wild Wild West was his sweet spot, paying him $15,000 every episode. In 1973, his earnings from a single guest appearance were just $3,000. Acting in live-action roles wasn't the end of his problems. He played the role of Dr. Paul Williams in Hanna-Barbera's 1972 animated feature Sealab 2020. The studio's insurance stepped in after only 2 episodes, forcing Martin out of his role. He made a subsequent joke about being the only actor to be fired just because he had a heartbeat. He persevered through all of these obstacles. He booked 87 guest parts from 1970 to 1981. He established himself as the leading man for zany geniuses, villains, and enigmatic plotters. His skill was undeniable, even yet Hollywood was hesitant to cast him in a leading position. His cameos in Love American Style, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Hawaii Five-0, and Hawaii Five-0 proved he could still rule the stage. It had always been obvious that he could assume the persona of any character. His 1960 Twilight Zone episode The Four of Us Are Dying featured him as a face-changing scam artist. The character required Martin to invent 4 different dialects, including that of a Southern gentleman and a Brooklyn mobster, which director John Brum subsequently confessed to. It wasn't part of the plot. His 1971 performance in Columbo was one of his most memorable and frame-worthy efforts. He portrayed the role of the arrogant art critic Dale Kingston, who frames his aunt and kills his uncle. In order to bring Elmer Derry to life, Martin researched the life of an art forger. Because he was so convincing, Peter Falk, who played Columbo, slipped up and said, "I hate this guy," while filming. The episode's finale, in which fingerprint-covered art books capture Kingston, garnered a 27.3 Nielsen rating. For the first season of Columbo, it was the most watched episode. His roles were varied and lighthearted. He was also rather funny. He portrayed Professor Patrick Hudson, an inventor who develops a device to transform water into explosives, in the 1966 Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode, A Do-It-Yourself Awful Thing. He had to use a lot of technical terms because of the position. He improvised much of it, drawing on physics concepts from his old law school texts, rather than memorizing lyrics. A reactor in the director's garage, as Joseph Sargent would later say. Off-screen, Ross Martin was just as dramatic as he was on screen. The guy behind the characters was molded by his own experiences of love and sorrow, and each relationship had an impact on him. In a modest ceremony held in New York City on June 17, 1941, he wed Muriel Weiss. He was a nighttime comedian and law student at George Washington University. Phyllis Rosenblatt, their daughter, was born in 1943 and went on to become a famous New York artist. Their marriage was already in trouble when Martin began taking on radio assignments and Broadway rehearsals at the outset of his career. They split up in the late 1950s but never actually got a divorce. After they broke up, Martin's devotion to Muriel never wavered. He discreetly covered the costs of her breast cancer treatment after her diagnosis in 1962. The illness persisted unabated. At the age of 47, Muriel died on March 15, 1965, while Martin was filming the pilot episode of Wild Wild West. His request for time off to attend the burial was denied by CBS management, who were concerned about potential production delays. There was complete disregard from Martin for them. After saying his last goodbyes, he returned to set the following morning after flying to New York overnight. He finally confessed, "I never forgave myself for leaving her when she needed me most, after all these years had passed." He eventually gave $250,000 to cancer research in her memory because the guilt never left him. Word of Muriel's passing spread slowly for a long time. The truth was made public when Martin remarried in 1967. The choice to move on was difficult for Phyllis, who was 24 years old at the time. Hollywood became his real family, she said later, even though he loved us. In a small wedding held in Beverly Hills on September 10, 1967, Martin wed Olavi Lucille Parsons. She has 2 children from a prior marriage and worked as a documentary filmmaker and model. George was born in 1957 and Rebecca in 1955. He even went to the extent of amending their birth certificates to reflect his paternity as a formal adoption. While others may have thought it was strange, Martin saw it as a means to formalize their relationship. A big obstacle appeared very quickly in their marriage, as Rebecca would later explain. While filming season 4 of The Wild Wild West in August 1968, Martin had a heart attack that was almost deadly. He was taken care of by Javi full-time. She oversaw his medicine intake, sneaked oxygen tanks into set, and even subdued his workload by negotiating with CBS. The only thing that kept him employed was her agreement to a 30% wage cut. The strain of the situation was too much. She had a miscarriage in 1969, but Martin kept quiet about it. Their bond as a family was unbreakable. George, Martin's adoptive son, followed in his footsteps and became an actor, securing a part in the 1978 television film The New Maverick with the help of his dad. As a result of Olavi's encouragement, Martin gave directing a go. The 2 episodes of Love, American Style that he directed between 1971 and 1973 were prompted by her. Regardless of the difficulty, they were there for one another. Continuing our journey side by side. The job that catapulted Ross Martin to fame was nearly enough to make him walk away. The role of Artemis Gordon in The Wild Wild West was offered to him 4 times by CBS in 1963, but he declined each time. The monotony of weekly television didn't appeal to him after finishing The Great Race. Being typecast was even more of a fear of his. The television industry was a creative snare for Martin, who had studied at Juilliard and could speak 8 languages. His ideal roles would push him to his limits. More than simply a means of subsistence. CBS was not going to quit. They offered an irresistible offer to the actor since they wanted him urgently. Episodes cost $5,000. Double Robert Conrad's earnings. Authority over his masks that he creates himself. For 6 months, they held off on releasing the pilot as well, in the hopes that he might alter his mind. Upon reaching a final agreement, he had one more request. A punch would never be thrown by Artemis Gordon. Martin said that he is not a fighter but a scam artist. This compelled the authors to think beyond the box. In Night of the Inferno, 1965, Artemis used devices like the sleeping gas cigar in disguises instead than fighting with her fists. It was a gamble that paid off. September 17, 1965 was the premiere of The Wild Wild West. The amount of fan letters Martin received was 3 times that of Conrad within a matter of weeks. Years later, he still finds it hard to comprehend that he was so close to discarding it all. Acknowledged in 1978 that he almost destroyed his own career. I am grateful that Blake Edwards' scathing criticism caused me to reconsider. The film industry was Martin's natural habitat, but he almost ruined his career with a single performance. In the 1962 film Experiment in Terror, Blake Edwards portrayed the role of Red Lynch, an asthmatic murderer. Columbia Pictures refrained from using his name in the teasers and marketing despite the horrific performance. Their biggest concern was that viewers would reject the Mr. Lucky actor in his murderous role. Its intended effect of heightening the film's tension was to the contrary. While critics gushed over Lynch's unsettling presence, viewers were perplexed. Even though Martin's voice was audible throughout 70% of the film, his name was conspicuously absent. The casting directors even thought he was funny, so they passed on him for other dramatic parts. Lawrence Harvey ended up getting the part in The Manchurian Candidate because of that. The harm was done, albeit the picture did become a cult classic in due time. The film opportunities Martin had been turning down had dried up by 1965, forcing the actor to return to television after a hiatus. It wasn't in Hollywood that Martin faced his toughest challenge, despite his skill. It came straight from his heart. The San Vicente Tennis Ranch in Ramona, California was the site of his 1981 collapse on July 3. The conclusion was harsh. After a near-fatal heart attack in 1968, he decided to prove himself strong by taking up the sport. In 1975, he had quadruple bypass surgery and diligently adhered to a program of medicine and exercise. All of it fell short. According to others who saw him, he became lightheaded mid-game, stumbled over to the clubhouse, and then passed out a few feet from the door. Even when paramedics were there in 8 minutes, his heart was already at a flatline. Olavi, Art Bale's wife, was pleading with him not to die, as he remembered in retrospect. Twice they shocked him, but it didn't work. He had already departed by the time they arrived at Pomerado Hospital in Poway. Officially, the death occurred at 3:17 p.m. A total occlusion of the widowmaker, or left anterior descending artery, was the root cause. He was eventually allowed for light activity by his doctor, but his drive was stronger than his body. 20 feet was the distance between Olavi and the point of collapse. After his first heart attack in 1967, she was there for him every step of the way, even smuggling oxygen tanks onto Wild Wild West sets so he could continue. As the paramedics applied chest compressions, she prayed the Lord's Prayer. She insisted he was only napping while she stayed by his side for 6 hours at the hospital. After that, she claimed the San Vicente Tennis Ranch's emergency response was too sluggish and sued them for $1.2 million. A settlement was reached outside of court. Martin had previously shot a scenario quite similar to this one in 1968's Night of the Janus, in which Artemus Gordon pretended to have a heart attack in order to trick the villains. More than 300 mourners attended Ross's funeral on July 7, 1981, at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in Los Angeles. Robert Conrad was present, and Olavi said afterwards that her life had been a living nightmare in terms of art imitating life. However, there were no speeches or grand eulogies. Instead, a rabbi recited Kaddish. Blake Edwards, who was shaken, later said that Ross deserved a funeral as grand as The Great Race, but that wasn't his style. Hollywood hardly responded. Just 2 publications, Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, published accurate obituaries. Only he and the main star were represented by CBS, the network that had previously paid him more. Outraged, Conrad exploded. After canceling his concert due to its violent content, they chose to disregard the artist behind it. The tragedy was further exacerbated by his death certificate. Despite having recorded an episode of Love Boat only 3 months prior, it described him as an actor who had retired. Yet, admirers kept in mind. In honor of his most renowned part, people still visit his cemetery at Mount Sinai every year on his birthday and leave little violins as a memorial. The finest way to put it was by Leonard Maltin. Ross Martin was not a mere corpse. A part of Hollywood's spirit died that day.